So this is a lesson or episode number 6, and this will be the final lesson or episode or class in my course examining and exploring and analyzing the issue of beginnings. How did all this come to be? Is the Bible correct in how it describes God creating the heavens and the earth? Or are the secularists or the atheists correct in saying that there is a natural explanation for everything that we see or experience in this world, and that there's really no need to believe in a supernatural being, that science has made the belief in God unnecessary and maybe even obsolete? Today, in this particular lesson, what I want to look at is the origins of man. Up until now, we've looked at the origin of the universe, the origin of life, the origin of the species, etc. Today, I want to look specifically at the origins of man. And there will be a smattering of discussion of a couple of other things, but that's the primary focus on what I want to talk about today. So I'm going to be sharing two videos as I have in several of these other lessons, although this time they're not going to be consecutive. I'm going to show one at the beginning and one very near the end. But again, we're going to be talking about, in this particular lesson, the origin of man.
Search for a so-called missing link has been underway ever since the 1859 publication of Darwin's On the Origin of Species. See, for evolution to find support, there needs to be evidence of a transition between creatures. Dinosaur to bird, ape to man, that sort of thing. And a number of them have been proposed, lifted high on a pedestal as solid proof that evolution is true. But advances in technology and a bit of direct scrutiny reveal these fossil forgeries for what they truly are: an exercise in imagination. Let's look at some of the most famous examples of mistaken identity and learn how and why these false fossils were able to bamboozle the experts on today's episode of Creation Connection. Welcome to Creation Connection. I'm Ivana. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. Okay? Let's get started. Named for the Neander Valley in which they were found, the bones that would become known as Neanderthal took the world by storm. Discovered in 1856, these bones were heavily studied by Thomas Henry Huxley, an English biologist and anthropologist. With his worldview shaped by the ideas of Darwin and others who held long-age beliefs, Huxley, of course, tried to fit this find into the supposed long course of human evolution. He concluded that Neanderthal was a man with ape-like characteristics, and with that, Neanderthals were shoved into the evolutionary scheme as a type of transitional creature, from ape to human. Things got weird from there, particularly when it came to art. In 1909, a paleontologist commissioned a depiction of Neanderthal man to be published in the Illustrated London News. The result? This savage-looking, hairy, club-wielding, mentally underdeveloped creature was the new face of Neanderthal man, and society ran with it. This portrayal dominated popular culture. The public perception was set in stone, resting on the faulty notion that Neanderthal was a brutish, subhuman caveman. But research in recent years has shaken the poor foundation these ideals were built on. Newer evidence, especially the discovery of fully human Neanderthal DNA sequences, fully human Neanderthal DNA sequences has proven that Neanderthals were nothing like the brutes they were imagined to be, but rather that they were just as human as we are today. Modern depictions of Neanderthal reflect this, as they look remarkably, well, human. Although not an intentional hoax, the tale of Neanderthal interpretations reveals how preconceived notions can cause the imagination to run wild. Our next case of mistaken identity takes us to Piltdown, England. The year is 1913, and just after the new year, America's leading scientific journal, Science, great name guys, described a discovery of the greatest importance, the nearest approach we have yet reached to a missing link. This Eoanthropus dawsoni is better known by the name Piltdown Man, and its discovery excited scientists of the time. As it supposedly bridged the gap between ape and human. A year earlier, in February of 1912, one Charles Dawson revealed the first bone fragments, stating that they had been found at the Piltdown gravel pit. Later that summer, more fragments were supposedly discovered, along with primitive tools. Of note, the discovery consisted of skull fragments that, when put together, seemed to show a human cranial cap and an ape-like jaw. This made waves in the scientific community, especially because the molars of the ape-like jaw seemed particularly human. Scientists spent years studying the skull, writing pages upon pages about the strange mixture of human and ape features. This resulted in at least 3 knighthoods among the men who dedicated their time and effort trying to fit the Piltdown Man into an evolutionary story. Unfortunately, these efforts were a waste of time, as 40 years later, the find was revealed as a forgery in a 1954 publication. This was no missing link, but a genuine human cranium and an orangutan's jaw, bearing molars manually flattened with a file. And to top it all off, it had all been stained to look ancient.
It's giving fake.
Oddly enough, Charles Dawson, the man who supposedly discovered the remains, had perpetrated a number of other similar hoaxes in the decades leading up to the Piltdown Man.
Cool, dude.
Though this time it took 4 decades for his grandest grift to be discovered. In 1998, an anonymous dealer purchased a fossilized creature and smuggled it out of China to the United States. While this was a fairly common practice, this fossil promised to be something special. In 1999, after some study, National Geographic revealed Archaeoraptor to the world. Along with a press conference, an article titled Feathers for T-Rex appeared in the November 1999 issue of their magazine. This sensational fossil was purported to prove the evolutionary connection between dinosaurs and birds, as it seemed to show a feathered dinosaur that was capable of flight. A very advanced bird-like shoulder structure, wishbone, and big sternum, all indicating the animal was a powerful flyer. Remains of feathers surround the specimen's bones, yet its tail was strikingly similar to the stiff tails of a family of predatory dinosaurs known as dromaeosaurs. That seems pretty conclusive, right?
Nope.
Well, from the beginning, there were skeptics within the scientific community. The curator of birds at the Smithsonian Institute, Stores L. Olson, wrote, "With the publication of Feathers for T-Rex, National Geographic has reached an all-time low for engaging in sensationalistic, unsubstantiated tabloid journalism." Oof. Among the controversial points surrounding the fossil were the fact that the remains of feathers were not actually proven to be feathers at all, and that there were no bones that connected the top half of the fossil to the bottom half. Unlike the century of false images of the Neanderthal or the decades-long dupe of Piltdown Man, the Archaeoraptor hoax quickly crumbled in early 2000. It was, in fact,
made up of at least 3 different fossils, pieced together to look like one single creature. The tail of a dinosaur and the body parts from multiple birds had been glued together and sold to us as a missing link.
but it was no such thing. A number of evolutionary scientists expected, no, wanted to see fossils that proved the supposed connection between dinosaurs and birds. So when one appeared, despite major skepticism from other evolutionists, they leapt on the opportunity. Storrs Olsen stated, after the fact, that truth and careful scientific weighing of evidence have been among the first casualties in their program, which is now fast becoming one of the grander scientific hoaxes of our age. At this point, the story is becoming familiar, and this song has yet another verse. In May of 2009, the fossil known as Ida was hailed as the sought-after missing link in human evolution. The media drummed up an impressive hype campaign with books, videos, a website, and a series of public unveilings. Ida is a stunningly well-preserved fossil, no doubt. But unfortunately, she was pushed to the forefront of the evolutionary agenda before the scientific details were actually published. After the television special that touted the fossil's supposedly transitional status aired, the skepticism really rolled in. Other evolutionary scientists piped up, saying that Ida is not a missing link and that there is no analysis to support the claims that were made about the fossil. Another stated, it's a spectacular fossil, but it doesn't really have any relevance for human evolution. It turns out that Ida was just a dead lemur. It's no wonder that Ida doesn't fill the supposed evolutionary gap she was supposed to. However, this doesn't change the damage caused by the grand media campaign surrounding the fossil. Ida is yet another case of some scientists seeing what they want to see instead of what's actually there. The theory of evolution rests on the idea that transitional fossils should exist to fill in the gaps between creature kinds. It makes sense that the scientists who believe in that theory would want to discover those fossils, despite the fact that no undisputed transitional fossils have been found. Dr. Thomas, what do you think about all this?
Australopithecus sediba. This is a name given to a collection of bones. The bones were taken from a mixed bone bed in Africa. It was first talked about as, hey, this is the latest, greatest transitional from ape to human. Well then, the next year, and then 2017 especially, had multiple technical journal articles come out in the journal Science, in the journal Human Evolution, and the scientists were comparing now, in more detail, each bone of the skeletons. The cranium of one matches what we already know from Australopithecus. It's an ape cranium. But the arm bones that are associated with that same skeleton exactly match human. So to claim that they even belong together, there's no evidence for that, because it was a mixed bone bed. You got turtle bones and cat bones and all other kinds of bones, and we're pretending like these bones associate, and I don't think it's real. Paper after paper kept coming out describing the leg bones, the hip bones, and each bone of each of these two skeletons was easily attributable to either known extinct apes or known human form. I think this is subtle and deceptive, because you know what? The ape bone and the human bone, even though they're associated, they never articulate. There's always a gap, a space where there's bones that are missing in between these two. That's what we need, though, that we need the transition. We need the transitional form that's partly ape, partly human. We want it to be a transition so badly that we're willing to cobble together a mix of actual ape with actual humans and bring them together and make a picture out of them and pretend like they belong to an actual creature, when in fact they don't. This illustrates what has been typical of, I would say, mainstream scientists who are determined to find a transitional form. They're letting themselves be deceived in some cases to think, oh, that's a transitional form. And then it turns out it was a fraud. But then they claim victory, like, well, science came along and disproved that fraud because, hooray, science. What about the 40 years that you were believing that it was really a transitional form, That's not a victory.
The death-driven process of evolution is a man-made idea that's meant to push God out of the picture. But the evidence just doesn't add up. We can rest firm on the truth of the Bible when it tells us that God created the world in only 6 days, and each creature according to its own kind. Thanks for joining us for Creation Connection. New episodes come out on Wednesdays.
So I just want to go through a little bit of a summary of some of the things that were talked about in the video and some of them that were not. But the bottom line here is that if we look at our kids or grandkids' textbooks, we will see that they're being taught evolution and evolution teaching that man and ape had an unknown but a common ancestor that existed somewhere between 5 and 20 million years ago. That's when the ancestors existed. Now, these depictions in these textbooks and other media are based on artists' rendering. They're paintings, really, is what they are, not scientific discovery. And I think you've seen a little bit of that already in the video that I just showed. So this is a kind of an example of what it might look like in a textbook. The ape in the tree, and then it starts to walk on 2 feet at least part of the time, and then of course it becomes a human. Now this is of course just an artist's rendering. This is a theory. This is not something that has been demonstrated in science. I've said this before that the tree of life, and of course the tree of the evolution of man, is these are artists rendering, and as we've just seen, the missing links between each one of these stages, well, it's still missing basically. And of course, as we saw in the video, there have been numerous times that there have been claims, oh, we found this fossil, we found this fossil, we found this link, and so forth. And time after time, they have been proven either to be wrong or outright hoaxes. One of them is or was called Nebraska Man. And of course, this was an artist's rendering of this brute walking around semi-human, the typical what we grew up as learning as cavemen, so to speak. Well, the fact is that this is the real Nebraska Man. Why is that? Because they built this image. What was the find? It was a tooth. That's all they found was a tooth. And they built this image, this illustration of this being that was in between man and his ancestors. And they built it based on the finding of a tooth. This was, of course, an article, and we see these, this was 100 and some years ago. We see it today when some new bone is discovered or whatever, and they claim, oh, we have found the missing link, when that is, of course, not true. Now, Piltdown Man was discussed in the video, so I don't need to go into a lot of time about that. Neanderthals. I remember in high school when I was going through high school and whatnot, and hearing about Neanderthal Man, and that Neanderthal Man was one of these links between the apes and human beings. Well, as you saw in the video, they finally discovered that, well, Neanderthals were really human beings. They're no link at all. They were Homo sapiens. They were human. Another one I remember is Cro-Magnon Man. That was quote, discovered and purported to be one of the to be the missing link, um, or one of the missing links between apes and man. Australopithecus. This was discussed briefly in the video as well. Uh, Basically, a scattering of bones. You may remember Australopithecus referred to as Lucy, as kind of the first of the amazing discoveries of an intermediate form. But as the gentleman in the video told you, this was in a mixed bone bed. There were all kinds of bones here of all different kinds of animals and human remains as well. And they sort of tried to piece it together to make it look like this was an in-betweener. This is, and if you looked in the textbooks, I don't know if they're still showing this in textbooks. It may be that there are some still. This, as you'll see, this is from National Geographic in March of 2000, where they're still rendering pictures and notions that this was an in-betweener, even though, as was described in the video, the bones don't match. And so it's really difficult to hold that this was a link from ape to man. And generally speaking, it's been accepted that this is certainly not the missing link that they're looking for. Um, Again, different sizes of bones that look similar and so forth are not proof of evolution. I talked about this before when we were talking about the origin of the species. You can look at different breeds of animals and they, of course, vary in size, but that is not proof of evolution of any kind, really. That's a proof of, like I said, different breeds, if you will. However, that notwithstanding, again, these depictions that we would see, these drawings or illustrations of what they purport that Lucy would have looked like, with, as you can see, in this particular museum, depicting Lucy as this hairy-legged being with human features. But obviously, all that they had discovered was a bunch of bones in a bed of bones of humans and all different kinds of animals. But they take that evidence and run with it, despite the fact that there is little to no evidence that this was in fact an intermediate form. Peking man was another discovery. This was in, basically about 100 years ago. I remember this was another one in the chain. But again, this was another one of these things where there are a variety of different kinds of bones, including Homo sapien, human remains found in the same site. And yet this Peking man is being described as a missing link between apes and man. Homo erectus, this was another one that was purported. Again, there have been a whole string of them, and each one of them has been knocked down. Homo erectus was also known as Java man. You may remember that. This is, again, still showing up in biology books at the turn of the millennia, even though, again, there is really no consensus whatsoever that this was a precursor, an ancestor. Rudolf Virchow, who had once been Haeckel's professor. Haeckel was the discoverer of Java man and is regarded as the father of modern pathology. Said, in my opinion, this creature was an animal, a giant gibbon, basically in the ape family. The thigh bone has not the slightest connection with the skull. Again, it was a mixed bone bed that they're piecing together to try and make it look like an intermediate form or a missing link that they've been searching for 2 centuries, really. And they're still looking for that. The remarkable fact is that all the physical evidence we have for human evolution can still be placed with room to spare inside a single coffin in a big box, basically. For ever since Charles Darwin, for well over a century, they've been looking for the evidence of, well, and not just of man, for the intermediate forms to explain naturally the origin of the species. And of course, that goes for the origin of man as well. This lineage from ape to man, and the entire body of evidence you could put in a box. And unfortunately, in that box would be these hoaxes and the taking of bones from animals and human and trying to put them together, even though they weren't found in that way. And then also another quote here, but anatomy and the fossil record cannot be relied on for defining evolutionary lineages, yet paleontologists persist in doing just this. We still see in high school and college textbooks these illustrations, the tree of life and the illustrations of the advancement from ape to man, with virtually no evidence whatsoever, and certainly no evidence that is a consensus, not even close, as to how that came to be. And again, whether that be for the evolution of man or for the evolution or the origin of the species. Now I want to show you one more video, which talks not just about human evolution in terms of ape to man, but the wonder of the human body.
Simply ignore that.
Wow.
And so
I didn't know that.
when I really studied the human body, this ecosystem is so intelligent, it could not have been put together by accident.
I would love to hear you disprove evolution. Can we do that?
Well, the main issue with evolution is the following. The main issue with evolution is we have taken enormous scientific leaps in the fossil records, right? So if evolution is true, then you find single-celled or multi-celled organisms, right? And you go from single-celled or two-celled organisms to four-celled, to eight-celled, to 16-celled. You go through a progressive evolution, if you will, of these organisms evolving into an increasingly more being-like creature. So evolution says basically that some bacteria got together in a mud puddle and they mated, and we went from single-celled organisms to multi-celled organisms to quadricellular to hexacellular to multicellular, and then these organisms began to form into systems that created organ systems, and then you basically had what is a rudimentary non-air breathing organism that was in the water to an organism that had gills, and then those gills moved out onto land, and then they started to breathe oxygen, and then this whole lineage of species evolved from this. The problem is there's zero evidence of that. The problem is you have these single-celled organisms and multi-celled organisms, and then there's just a giant gap in the fossil record. And you have animals, and then you have man. But we don't have a fossil record that takes us from single and multi-celled organisms into an entire species. And we just simply ignore that.
Wow.
And so
I didn't know that.
we ignore the science that would validate that evolution was. And two, for me, when I really study the human body, and by the way, we have barely scratched the surface of understanding this thing that God created. It is fascinating in its ability. Modern medicine will say, well, that was a miracle cure. It's not a miracle cure. It's when people are miraculously cured from things, it's because they figured out the deficiency, or they figured out that we're that we're an entire being. We've lost faith in the ability that this has over this. The medicine treats our mental health and our physical health almost as separate creatures. And so you destroy somebody's gut health, their mental health will follow. You will not have, again, I've never met a patient that suffers from anxiety that didn't have gut issues. So what I'm saying is you have this perfectly beautiful organism. You have these communities of trillions of cells. God gave us everything that we need to thrive. Everything that we need to thrive. The best research that is being done on the surface of Mother Earth right now is being done on the basics that God gave us. Magnetism from the earth, oxygen from the air, light from the sun, whole foods, minerals from that you would get if you scooped water out of a flowing stream, grounding by discharging into the earth and changing the polarity of your body, repolarizing the surface of your blood cells, learning to actually allow sunlight into your eyes and to touch your skin. We're very photovoltaic beings. And so what happens when we start to disconnect from Mother Nature? What happens when we start to disconnect from what God gave us and replace it with what man made us? This is how we become sick and diseased and pathological. One of the reasons, getting back to evolution, is you look at how this human body is structured, and you see that, for example, an artery will have a certain diameter, and it carries this warm oxygenated blood away from the heart. And then wrapped around this artery, comprising the same diameter, but divided into smaller little pipes, are the veins. And the veins are smaller in diameter, and they're wrapped around the artery to improve the heat exchange. And so you start digging into this, and you're like, this is the most sophisticated engineer in the world designed this system, because the warm fluid that's leaving changes the temperature of the cool fluid that's coming back. And the way you change the temperature is you divide the same diameter into smaller pipes and you wrap it around this other pipe. You don't see arteries and veins like this. You see artery and veins like this. And so and I could give you 1,000 examples of this. It's just incredible how the body can, when you fast, for example, your body goes into the state called autophagy, where it actually starts to eat cells that are useless in the body. It recycles them. Right? You look at any faith in the world, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Hindu, you look at any major religion in the world, they all have periods of fasting. And they have periods of fasting because fasting wasn't just to deprive you of, pleasures of the flesh. It was to heal you. It was actually designed, when we didn't have the medications that we have today, it was designed to cleanse and heal the body, because when you go into a fasted state, this miraculous condition starts to emerge where your body efficiently sends the immune system out into the world, and it starts to eat the useless cells in your body and break them apart into the amino acids that we use other places for energy. It's so incredibly efficient. It's like, the greatest PhD chemist in the world designed the chemical component. The greatest architectural engineer in the world designed the architecture of it. The structure of it is so incredible. If you look at how we take the same minerals and create bone, calcium, phosphorus, form hydroxyapatite, create this bone, and then we warehouse a factory inside the bone that creates the red blood cells, and the red blood cells are responsible for shuttling the gases around in the body. And this ecosystem is so intelligent, and it couldn't, and not in my opinion, but in the scientific evidence, it could not have been put together by accident. It didn't happen by happenstance. God gave us everything that we need to thrive. If you can't find it on the surface of the earth, you probably don't need it to live a healthy, happy, long, thriving life, right? It's when we start picking up the things that God didn't give us, we start eating highly processed foods, glyphosates, preservatives, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, fake foods, dyes, the MSGs, the genetically modified foods, which are not even foods. And we start putting these non-natural compounds into the body. Now we become diseased and sick and pathological. And now we're relying on chemicals and synthetics and pharmaceuticals to fix the pathology that was caused by the chemicals, the synthetics, and the pharmaceuticals. It's such a vicious cycle. But if we go back to what God gave us, meat, fish, chicken, eggs, vegetables, sunlight, grounding, breath work, exercise, nature, um, uh, water that is free of glyphosate and free of chlorine and free of fluoride and microplastics and pharmaceuticals, you'd find that we could fix this entire pandemic of chronic disease in the country. Just going back to what God gave us.
Wow. So you're not eating Bill Gates' fake meat?
His lab-grown meat. Italy banned that shit, man. It's crazy.
No matter where you're watching Sean Ryan Show.
So I hope that was that was informative to you. Obviously, as the gentleman said, we could go on for hours and hours talking about the wonder of the creation of the human body. Anyway, just a quote here: Darwinian evolution is unscientific, unobservable, unbelievable, but understandable in a world that hates God. There are obviously devout and devoted Christians who believe that God used evolution as a process. There are Christians who are obviously just as devoted or more, who believe that the Bible describes a 6-day creation. Whether you believe in the old earth or the young earth or evolution, or you don't believe in evolution, obviously you can still be a Christian. It's all about who you say Jesus Christ is. However, as far as someone who is an atheist, a secularist, a humanist, they have to believe in evolution because there's no other choice, whether there's evidence for it or not. And hopefully, if you've been paying attention or you've been watching this course, these classes, these videos, these lessons, you understand that the evidence, the scientific evidence, the data is scant as far as its support for evolution. It cannot answer, how did the material units come into being? Is there a natural explanation? No, they don't even try. They purport a Big Bang, and regardless of whether the Big Bang is how everything actually began, you have to explain, well, where did the matter come from to be banged? And of course, they don't even try to explain that. How did life begin on Earth? How did non-living matter become living matter? They cannot explain that naturally. How did this explosion of new species, it was explained in the video and you saw it in the previous lessons, this explosion of new species that happened in this one strata of a layer of fossils and so forth, just boom, all of a sudden this litany of new species with no precursors, no ancestors. How on earth did that happen? Again, what's called the Cambrian explosion. Science, the evolutionists have no explanation for it other than to say, the one theory of punctuated equilibrium. Well, a dinosaur laid an egg and a bird came out, or vice versa. That is basically, that's believing in miracles, and that's what they accuse us of leaning on the supernatural. And of course, as we talked about in this lesson, how did mankind begin? We are described in the Bible as being a little lower than the angels, whereas an evolutionist says, well, we're just a little higher than the apes. Well, as you saw in this particular lesson, the supposed missing links, which demonstrates the progression from apes to man, is completely missing. They have tried over and over again to purport different findings, some of them in their zeal to find the missing link. They've purported hoaxes, or they have taken bones from apes and humans and pieced them together, even fit together to try their level best to come up with a missing link. But again, there's no evidence other than illustrations in textbooks or National Geographic or wherever else. These drawings basically showing this progression from ape to man with no data to show that that's actually what happened. It's not scientific. And so, indeed, has science made belief in God unreasonable or at least unnecessary when it comes to these matters? Well, I would say the evidence would say no. I would say that there is so little evidence, for naturalistic explanations of everything that we've talked about, that in fact it hasn't even come close to making belief in God obsolete. In fact, the body of the evidence points to a supernatural engineer, a supernatural mind, and a supernatural power that brought all of this into existence. And he is the one who is the author of the scripture who told us that that's exactly what he did. I hope this series and this lesson that they've all been informative to you. I know there was a lot of scientific detail that some of you thought you had left behind when you were in high school or college or whatever, and some of it may have seemed to you to be tedious. But I will say this to you, even if it's something that you weren't necessarily interested in personally at this stage in your life, I would say your kids and your grandkids are being fed in the public schools, at least, and most schools, evolution as scientific fact. And again, making naturalistic explanations all that's necessary. Whereas, as I hope you have seen, the evidence for what they're teaching is scant at best. So perhaps you will share this information with someone, a young person who needs to have their eyes opened to what is true. Thank you, and God bless you for watching this lesson and hopefully all the other lessons. God bless you.